I'm Shawna Rosner, your host of In-House Counsel Chronicles. Today, I am joined by Arun Kottha. Arun graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Management from Case Western Reserve University and his Juris Doctor from the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law. Arun has been practicing law since 2008. He is currently General Counsel and Chief Risk Officer for Unison Risk Advisors. Welcome to the podcast, Arun.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So I wanted to start off by mentioning you graduated from law school in 2008. There was a financial crisis going on at that time. I remember that very, very well. What was it like to start your career then? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, sure. So yeah, my first day of law practice was September 1st, 2008. So I was lucky enough to have a job and to have a job at a large regional firm, Tucker was actually right here in my building. And I think I was on the job for about 2 days before they announced, or it became a thing, that it was the actual financial housing crisis. For that first, I'd say 3 years, I'd kind of go to work every day expecting not to have a job anymore, right? So, and you heard stories of, whole departments getting laid off or terminated, stuff like that. So it was a really interesting time to start, the legal practice. So I came in the trial department of Tucker Ellis, but what I quickly pivoted to, I wanted to make myself as valuable as possible. So I'd be as hard to fire as possible. So I reached out and I really got good relationships with the corporate department, and I volunteered for literally anything, and I mean anything. I mean, I went to sheriff sales to try to pick up commercial property. I did collections. I did commercial foreclosures. I did bankruptcy. I did workout work. I did just a wide variety of stuff that I wasn't hired to do. But I was so scared that I really just tried to make myself as valuable as possible. So it was a really unique experience. Remember the whole cash for clunkers and that whole era? I mean, it was a really a really different time. But luckily I was able to survive, and I stayed there for I think about 7 years before I went over to my first in-house job.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. Did that experience that you had at Tucker Ellis, the beginning of your career, where you're really volunteering and doing so much, did that trigger your interest in going in-house, or is that something you always thought about? How did it affect you?
Okay, that's a great question. So I'm only on my third, I call it my third big boy job, of life. So Tucker Ellis, I went to Goodyear, and now I'm at URA, or Unison Risk Advisors. So I take the approach that the job that I'm in, I'm planning to be there for the rest of my career. So at Tucker Ellis, I mean, it is such a great place to work with such great people. I think their tagline is something like different and better. It's true. I mean, the people are just, genuine, fun people to work with. Well, I kind of had this aha moment, and I tell a story sometimes where I can't remember where I was, but I had a national trial practice, and I was traveling all the time. And I was in a hotel in Portland or Seattle or something, and my son was about a month old, and I was able to take 2 full days of paternity leave, not 2 weeks, not 2 months. And I looked in the mirror and I said, "What are you doing?" All I wanted to do was be home and hug my chubby little son. So, that was in 2012. So then I, became interested in kind of that in-house path, but it wasn't automatic, right? I mean, if you think about in-house jobs at that time, I had fully gone into my, trial work, experience, and most in-house jobs are not claims or trial work, right? They're corporate work. So I had to kind of build a strategy to make myself more marketable. It helped the early financial crisis experience. That helped round out the resume, but I built a strategy to develop a regulatory practice, and specifically heavy industry, chemical, right, safety, both product safety and occupational safety. And I executed on that strategy for 4 years until the right opportunity came along over at Goodyear.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I can relate. I was a litigator. That's where I landed, and I kind of saw the writing on the wall. It wasn't going to be the right lifestyle for me for raising a family because their schedule wasn't really your own. But I love how you did do this thoughtfully, and then you ended it up at Goodyear. You were there for over 6 years, I believe,
Yep,
correct?
that's right.
And
I think it was 6.5 or something like that. Yeah.
and you were lead attorney for global safety. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So not product safety, but all of the industrial and occupational safety for Goodyear for the globe.
So what did your day-to-day look like in that position?
Shawna, it was so much fun. I mean, obviously, I'm a lawyer, so I had a lot of lawyer things to do, drafting up responses to regulators and stuff like that. But I really attached myself, truly embedded myself into the group that I was supporting. And, I found myself in largely business type meetings where I'm, helping them develop a strategy, which was really fulfilling, right? Goodyear is a great company, has the highest ethics. It was really, really fun to kind of work in that. That was my first in-house job. So really be that good business partner and not necessarily, solely a legal advocate. But while I was there, I also had the opportunity, if there were, incidents, I would go, I would parachute in and kind of be a lead investigator, or lead counsel or both for some pretty high consequence things. So it was, I was in my early 30s at the time, and it was really formative, right? I had some really good mentors in the legal department, both my boss and my boss's boss, who was the general counsel, and then just peers, right? Who I always felt inferior because they were so dialed in. They were such good attorneys. And I always thought I had something to learn from them. And then on the business side, I mean, some of my greatest friends were from the business side that, we didn't always agree. In fact, we disagreed more often than we agreed, but, we kind of worked through those difficult situations without being disagreeable. It was a great time, a great place to work. I mean, what a great place.
So what made you decide to leave Goodyear? I know you landed at Unison Risk Advisors, where you are now. That was 2022. I think that's when we met. I was talking to you at that time. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So like I said, I take every job like it's going to be my very last one. So I was in my then late 30s at the time. And, I was kind of thinking like, well, what do I could be here for the rest of my career. It's a great place to work. Or do I try to go, get that big promotion, right? And go and become, associate general counsel or general counsel. So I remember talking to my wife and I said, listen, her name's Carmen. Carmen, I'm only going to leave. Like I already have the A job, right? I already have that. So I'm only going to leave for A+ or A++. So, I was kind of lightly testing the market. That's when we met, in 22. And I just kind of waited for that opportunity. And it came not through Unison Risk Advisors, but through Oswald Companies, which is one of the platform companies of Unison Risk Advisors. So I was hired as the general counsel for Oswald Companies, which, people in Cleveland will know is a 125-year-old risk management and insurance brokerage firm. Now we have operations in Michigan, headquarters in Detroit, Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh. So kind of that upper Midwest, kind of area. And then growing up as a baby lawyer in Cleveland, I knew Oswald Companies. I mean, I was on boards with people from Oswald Companies, and always, it's PIRC. PIRC is the acronym for our core values, but I is integrity. And I always thought that they lived that. So that was my A+ job. So luckily things worked out. And I interviewed and I landed at Oswald Companies as their general counsel.
Yeah. And then shortly after that, tell me about how it turned into Unison Risk Advisors. And I know you wear many hats there. So love to hear about that as well.
Sure. So Unison Risk Advisors is the ultimate parent company, right? So we are a family of companies geographically located. So there's Oswald here that fills out the kind of Ohio, Michigan, Pittsburgh area. And then it actually merged to form Unison Risk Advisors with RCM&D, which is a mid-Atlantic powerhouse, 140-year-old firm, right? Sterling reputation, really client focused. And then the core of these two companies is employee ownership. So we're one of the largest employee owned insurance brokerages in the country, and we still are employee owned, which is a really, fun thing. It's good for recruiting, right? People actually own a stake in the company, and it's good for the entrepreneurial spirit that people have here. So that was Oswald and RCM&D. And then since then, we've been lucky enough to have a couple other platform partners join us, and we're still on our journey in our, mergers and acquisitions phase. So I went from Oswald General Counsel to Unison Risk Advisors General Counsel, and that at the time was only Oswald and RCM&D. But as we've grown, we now have the kind of ACC country, or Florida, Georgia, the Carolinas area kind of covered by one of our partners down in Miami. And then we have kind of Central PA, Delaware. So we have all of Mississippi East pretty well covered with physical locations. We do business in all lower 48, but with physical locations, we have the Mississippi East pretty well covered.
And so I think you wear many hats there. I know your title isn't just general counsel. Tell me about that.
Sure. So general counsel, corporate secretary, pretty common title. So recently, we had the chief risk officer job performed by the former longtime CFO. And, I was speaking with my two bosses, right? The CEO and president of Unison Risk Advisors. And, we kind of talk about the kind of importance of a chief risk officer, right? Not a title for title's sake, but to actually dig into enterprise risk management and, kind of work through those, kind of high severity risks to make sure we're documenting them, make sure we have mitigations in place to get the risks to where they're acceptable risks. So I don't know whether it's, being voluntold or whether I actually wanted the job. I think it's kind of half and half, but my name came in the hat for that, and the board just approved that in December. So, we're kind of new on our formal journey. Again, we've always had one. We're a risk management firm. This is in our blood. It's in our core. We do this already, but it's kind of a new initiative to have that role formally designated. So we're kind of going down that path.
Okay, gotcha. So that changed kind of your day-to-day. You've now added something new.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So we have the legal work, right? And then we have the, so I guess this is a business role, or at least a business adjacent role, right? Not purely legal, right? So it's cross-functional. It goes across, all functional disciplines. Think of IT, HR, stuff like that, but also all business segments and business units. So it's a pretty good cross section of the company.
I'm glad you're sharing that, because I talk to a lot of attorneys who aspire to go in-house. And when they do tell me they want to be a part of the business. So you were able to navigate that. And was there anything in your background that you think really got you to this point of saying like, hey, yeah, I'm ready for this?
Sure. Well, I think it's a couple things. One is, if you just have a mindset, now this may come off as trite, but if you have a mindset of like, I always want to continue learning for the rest of my life, right? Like everything is interesting to me, no matter even if it's boring, it's interesting. So, which is why I kind of, had such a good run on my former employer, because I was genuinely interested in everything that they were doing. And so, I'm always interested in how the business is performing, how, we can balance, and I mean reasonably balance, because businesses take risks, right? Businesses always take risks. So how do we balance an appropriate risk appetite, right, with the business needs, and how do we kind of ideally merge those? And that's just a really interesting, it's a really interesting dynamic. And then, having, I have a finance degree from Case Western Reserve, just kind of some of those fundamental blocking and tackling, even though I never served in a management or finance role, I always pursued legal. But I mean, like, that helps, having that, kind of having that kind of basic knowledge.
Great. And you've been integrally involved in risk management throughout your career. And obviously assessing and managing risk is a very important part of big companies like Goodyear and Unison. Do you see any trends or changes on the horizon relative to risk for companies of this size?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to realize that, and actually the hardest, I'll answer part of your last question with this answer. The hardest thing to transition to the risk management practice, and this is years ago, starting in the mid 2010s, you really have to actually lean into it, right? So like everything in my lawyer fabric was, don't write that down, don't document that, because if something goes wrong, it'll be evidence exhibit A in the in the trial. But that's kind of playing defense. If you want to really manage risk, you have to go play offense, and that means being uncomfortable. Now you have to document smartly. You have to use careful communication techniques, right? You have to be smart, but you have to really lean into it. And by that, I mean, go and chase the risk, go and assess the risk, document the risk, but most importantly, document what you're doing about it, right? So that was the biggest, kind of paradigm shift for me as I started in this at a former employer and here now is, every fiber of me wants to to just shrink from the assessment piece of it. But that's part of the process. I'd rather have those documents prevent 10 incidents, right, than cause me a problem in defending one, right? Because hopefully I'll reduce the frequency and I'll reduce the severity. So I that's important, certainly for lawyers as they're, kind of towing this line between pure legal and like kind of legal business risk management, kind of risk officer type of work. You really have to lean into it with the caveat that you have to be smart, obviously, in how you document and stuff like that. And then trends, I mean, without being trite, I mean, I think, cyber risks are more prevalent than ever. And, the malicious actors they can move so much quicker than governmental actors, right? So like the U.S. government trying to prevent, cyber attacks and industry trying to prevent cyber attacks, the malicious actors have unlimited time, right? And they're not constrained by ethics, and they're not constrained by budgets, and they're not constrained by, ethical use of AI and stuff like that. So, I think we have to keep on being dynamic in our risk assessment and our mitigations.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was just at a conference a week and a half ago for people in my industry, legal recruiting, and some of those privacy issues came up. Some of the things you mentioned about documenting, not documenting, what risk that leads you to, even in our business. So I know it's across all industries. I see that you have a certification in information privacy, and you have one in compliance and ethics. Were these certifications you took on yourself, and how do you use those in your position now?
Yeah. So yes, so it was not a job requirement for my former employer. I had to study for tests, but I met the experience requirement. All these things have experience requirements. So I just thought again, continuous learning mindset. I thought they were interesting, so I decided to pursue them. And that is where a lot of the risk is for large organizations or financial institutions, for my former employer, my current employer. So I thought it was necessary to have those designations. And the information privacy one is invaluable because of the patchwork, right, across industry. So there's industry vertical regulations like Gramm-Leach-Bliley under financial institutions. There's educational institutions. There's HIPAA. And then, of course, you lay over the state patchwork of data privacy, data breach, and privacy regulations. It just becomes a really complex scheme of regulation. And then now that we're operating internationally, we just opened up a London-based operation. We have to make sure we're, leaning into those international data security and privacy regulations. So there's something I did on my own, but I mean, it's really valuable. If you're kind of looking for your first job in compliance, it kind of gives you a little bit of credibility, right? You've done this. Now, again, obviously your resume has to be good and you have to interview well and stuff like that. For lawyers who want to go into compliance alone, which there are a lot of them, it's not a bad credential to have just to show you have credibility.
Yeah, I see it every so often, attorneys having that designation. So that explanation to me is helpful. Do you guys now have at your company, do you have someone that's an attorney designated for privacy and cybersecurity at this time?
Well, so we don't have attorneys doing that work, but we have a really excellent cybersecurity department, IT department, and the first hire I made was not a legal resource. It was a director of compliance. And we were probably too small at the time to need one, a full-time dedicated director of compliance. Well, guess what? We have 6 platform companies. We need one now, right? But luckily, we've had that 2-year runway to spin up our program, right? And of course, being a largely insurance broker, we're largely regulated by state departments of insurance. But, we have retirement planning services people who are regulated by SEC and FINRA. We have obviously the whole HIPAA regime. We have Gramley-Smiley. We have a patchwork of regulations that we have to be concerned with. So the best hire and the first hire I made was a director of compliance. Those people happen to not be lawyers, but that's not a job requirement. You need to be in the industry, know our business, which is the case, and have a certain comfort in being uncomfortable because of the uncertainty in regulatory interpretation, regulatory enforcement, and kind of the whole regulatory landscape.
Yeah, has that department grown? Do you see a need for that growing?
Yeah. So yes. So the kind of first thing we did, and again, our director of compliance is awesome. She built the business case for centralizing certain functions. So like licensing, for example. So before, each platform company had their own licensing person. Some people, that was their full-time job. Some people, it's kind of a half-time job. And we thought that we can really get efficiency, in centralizing the licensing function. So we kind of, spun off some roles of other people. They still work here, but they just lost the licensing function. And then we made a dedicated team of licensing people. And then the best part is you can take a vacation. You can take a vacation and somebody else can support you, right? So it really kind of works out well. So yeah, that's growing, and we anticipate growing that department. We have the kind of blocking and tackling really well in hand, and we're looking for that next level of excellence. And whether it's a process improvement, person, an operations person, someone like that to come join our compliance department to make us even better.
Okay, great. I've actually placed before an attorney in a compliance role where they weren't requiring that, but it ended up to be the best person. And I think they got a lot of value out of it.
Oh, yeah. I've worked with dynamite, people whose sole job is compliance, like, VP or director of ethics compliance, happen to be a lawyer, and they can really, bring that perfect balance of they're excellent at regulatory interpretation, can come up with very specific solutions, but also have that business acumen to be able to get it across the finish line and get it implemented. Yeah, I mean, that is a great lawyer role. Hands down, a great lawyer role.
So I want to ask you real quick, I'm throwing this in there. I know you're involved in the community. I know you're obviously a really busy attorney.
Yeah.
But tell me a little bit about that and why it's important for you to spend some time in the community outside of the office.
Yeah. So I'm proud to be a incredibly long time volunteer for legal aid. And so I both in Akron when I was at a former employer and here in Cleveland, both at the beginning of my career when I was a baby lawyer and now continuing today. So I grew up in the city and I grew up poor. So, all of my volunteerism go to 2 main areas. One is food banks and one is legal aid, legal services for underserved populations. So I kind of take my experience, going back and apply that now that I have the luxury. Now it's hard. It's hard to get up on a Saturday morning when you've been working all week. That's hard, but I take that and I apply that to where I believe my volunteering mission is. And, I'm also on the Shaker Heights Board of Appeals, which is a kind of quasi-judicial, it's the administrative remedy before the civil court system for a lot of disputes in the city of Shaker Heights. And I'm real proud of that. I started there when I was a baby lawyer. It was 2009, I think. And now I'm the ranking I'm now the oldest citizen member on the board, which is, I'm sorry, not oldest, the longest serving, member. So yeah, thanks for asking that. I don't believe we talked about that during our interview call, but thanks for asking that. I mean, it's something I really believe in, and I really encourage all of our legal practitioners to get out there and do that important work.
Yeah, it is very important work, and we need people like you, and I'm so glad that you're a part of our community doing what you do and giving back, and thanks for sharing that part of your story. I want to pivot now before we end to asking you a couple questions about advice. If you went back in time and gave yourself advice while a law student, what would it be and why?
Wow, that's a good question. I think of two answers, but I think the one I'll give you is the one that I eventually figured out, is that there's no such thing as bad work. And by that, I mean, it's always great to get the nice, shiny assignment, but if you just keep on raising your hand, you're going to get a breadth of experience, especially as a young lawyer. You'll get a breadth of experience that you wouldn't otherwise have, right? So going back to your very first question, because I raised my hand, some of that was crappy work, right? I had to go to a sheriff's sale. Right? I mean, like that's not lawyer's work, but it was, because it was important to my client, right? Being buried in document review for an M&A deal, right? Getting no credit for that. But all that stuff, there's no such thing as bad work. If you get that breadth of experience, you'll be more valuable because you've seen more. You've simply seen more rather than being super pin focused in your, what you think is your chosen subspecialty. So, I mean, that's what I would get to law school. Even while in law school, I mean, I was lucky enough, super lucky. I had a paid internship at an insurance defense firm starting as a 1L. Not typical, right? Results not typical. But even if you can't get paid and you have to struggle to, you waitress or you're a host on the weekends or something like that, if you get experience, just get experience. There's no bad experience, right? Because eventually you'll be able to parlay that into the job you want or the career you want.
I think that's great, really great advice for everyone, no matter what career they are, to get the experience for sure, and raise your hand. So thanks for sharing that. Do you have any advice for our listeners who are hoping to move in-house?
Sure. Yeah. So the first is reputation and relationships matter. Now, and it's incredibly hard. I mean, I've been on the private practice side, right? When you're working the 70-hour weeks, then you have to go network to try to get more business. That's hard. That's really hard. But I mean, the more people you connect with, each of my positions, it never got me the job. That's a false, I mean, that's a farce, right? Just because you know someone, it won't get you the job. But if you can get to be one of the top 10 resumes they review, that's all the leg up you need. Your resume needs to be good. You need to interview well. You need to be the best fit and candidate. You can't substitute that. But your relationships really matter, especially in the city where you work, right? And even better if you can get kind of national exposure at conferences and stuff like that. So that's one. And two, if you don't find yourself where you want to be, the best advice I can give is plan for never making it out to the in-house job, because you never want to be in a situation where you put all those eggs. Now, they're rare. The jobs are rare, right? They're highly coveted, right? So build it so, what's the worst thing? You have a $2 million book of business and you're a partner in a law firm. That's not the worst planet. Now, you may not want to do that, but make it so that you can be secure and happy at the place you're at, but build a plan. So we never got to talk about, so the plan I was going to be, so first I need to get internal work in my chosen regulatory field. So I solicited all the product safety, product labeling, chemical safety work that we had at the law firm. And then I went out and joined a chemical association, a local chemical association. And I went to talk to them like, hey, your bylaws say you have to be in the business. Can lawyer join? I'm technically in your business, your client, and some of my clients. And they said, well, we've never been asked that before. But yeah, come on in. So I was the only lawyer. So that was a target rich environment. And then I had a social media strategy, right? So, through tools, you don't have to post through the week. You just set up all your posts on Sunday night, which is when I did it. One to hit Tuesday morning, one to hit Thursday afternoon, whatever. I built the strategy so I can have thought leadership in the space. So I was doing my job and doing it well, I hope, so I could always stay. And then I built the strategy so that if I wanted to or the right opportunity came, I could leave. So it's kind of like the only situation where you can have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, that's a lot of really good advice. I am a big proponent of relationship building, and I think doing it at any point in your career and bringing to everyone's attention, like, look, if the in-house doesn't work and you're in a good spot, like it doesn't have to be, and it's not going to be everyone's like it was, yours. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a really good place to end. I've really enjoyed having you as my guest. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
All right, take care now.